time, a special guest on Rewound Radio.
We have a very special guest with us today here on Rewound Radio. I am very happy to welcome John Gehron. Welcome to Rewound, John.
It's nice to be on the show.
We are very happy to have you. And of course, we do want to talk about WLS and some of the other legendary stations that you have been a part of. But before we get to all of that hallowed ground, I thought maybe we should back up a little bit and have you tell us how you first got interested in radio, maybe what your first job in radio was, because it's always interesting to find out what sets people upon their path.
Well, I remember as a teenager, I used to love listening to radio from around the country and do DXing and listening to these radio stations like WKBW in Buffalo and, of course, WABC and the stations that, would come through late at night. That was always fun to listen to. And then I found a friend that could build transmitters in his basement, and I had the records and he had the transmitter because I did record hops. So we would turn on his transmitter on the weekends and do some DJ shows. And I thought, this is kind of fun. And then I went to college and got involved in college radio. And then I got fired from college radio, and I thought, well, I'm going to go work for money instead of working for free. And so I worked for 2 radio stations in the local town where Penn State is, until one of them found out I was working at the other one at the same time. So then I went to Altoona and got a job on weekends. And then I was very fortunate when I graduated, I got a management trainee job at Triangle Publications, which owned a bunch of TV stations and radio stations around the country. One of the best was WFIL in Philadelphia. And I got to work there a year as helping in production and working with all the jocks and doing commercials and things like that. And it just was a wonderful experience to set me up with how radio stations work, how to work with talent, how things really happen. And then I got an opportunity. You don't always get an opportunity to become a program director in a top 10 market for your first job. But a gentleman I had met went across the street from WFIL to WCAU-FM and had this idea to do oldies and needed somebody to program it, and called me, and that's how I got started in programming. So I was at CAU-FM back in the 70s. That went really well, and so they moved me to New York to CBS-FM, and that went real well, doing oldies there. And then I was competing against Rick Sklar at WABC and here this oldies station. Of course, back in the 70s, oldies was a 25, 34-year-old format, not a 50-plus format like it tends to be now. And we were really pushing WABC. Here is this FM station pushing a 50,000-watt radio station. And so Rick took notice. And I have to tell this story because it's so Rick Sklar's. He was such a terrific man. I really got to enjoy talking to him a lot. But he calls me over and he pulls out the sheet of paper, and across the top he had all the formatics, time, temperature, jingles, all the things that are part of the format. And he had check-marked everything off. He had listened to the station and marked everything that I was doing. He says, "Kid, you're doing everything right. So, I like what you're doing, and we have this job in Chicago at WLS. Would you be interested in considering it?" And I thought, there were 3 radio stations that affected the country. It was WABC, WLS, and KHJ. Of course, I always wanted to work at WABC, but I thought, WLS isn't the worst place in the world. And so I interviewed for that, and that's how I got out to WLS. Rick recommended me. Marty Greenberg, a terrific general manager, hired me, and that started me on my way in the big markets.
So when you first began, was your ambition, was your ambition just to be a DJ, or did you always have programming in the back of your mind as a thing?
Well, I thought I would be a DJ, and I tried being a DJ, and I was a very good DJ of what I call a DJ that's good at name, it's called, it's by, here's my name and stuff like that. I was good at that basic stuff. Beyond that, after hearing other jocks and then even working, at WF, I realized very quickly that I wasn't going to be a good jock, and that I really was better at this other stuff behind the scenes. And that's really what I enjoyed and flourished at. So I was smart enough to realize that early on, so I didn't go from job to job to job for years trying to think that I was going to be, Dan Ingram.
Yeah, I think many of us had that revelation at some point. So when you were at WCAU-FM in Philadelphia, you came to Pam's to get a custom jingle package done for the oldies format. And I guess you were the client for that package. It was one of those grid packages where they record a small number of music tracks and sing a lot of different versions over it.
Right.
And let's take a short pause here just to play a few of those jingles from your days in Philadelphia.
Solid Gold Radio, WCAU FM. 98, 98 music, WCAU FM. Solid Gold Radio, WCAU FM.
Philly's golden music, WCAU
FM. Philly's golden music, WCAU FM.
Now, the next stop for you, as well as that jingle package, was WCBS-FM in New York. Were you the guy who actually flipped CBS-FM to oldies? Because before that, they had been kind of an album rock, progressive kind of format.
They were trying to make a transition, but it wasn't working well. And that's why they moved me from Philadelphia, where it was working well, on an automated radio station, by the way. I had one disc jockey, Jim Nettleton, who would come in every week and record a bunch of tracks, and then we put them together on tapes. I mean, it was a crazy system, but I learned very early on that it's what the listener hears, and if you do it right, it doesn't matter. You can make a lot of mistakes if you do the basic things right. And so as bad as it could sound at times being automated, we were playing music that people wanted to hear and couldn't hear anywhere else, and we were playing the right music in the right order, and it worked.
Yes, it did. And that story reminds me that I should have also played this jingle for you.
Jim Nettleton, WCAU FM.
See that? Topical jingles on demand. That's one of our specialties around here. Okay, so in 1972, they transferred you from Philadelphia to WCBS-FM in New York. And at that point in time, WABC on the AM band was the biggest in terms of audience, but you didn't have the FM all to yourself because WOR-FM was significant. And as I recall, they played a lot of oldies as well. So what was the music like for an oldie station in 1972, and how did you differentiate yourself from OR-FM?
Well, when I got there, I recall that they were pretty much top 40. I mean, they weren't playing the oldies as deep as we were doing, and you're right, we were more 60s, 70s based. But I had Future Gold because at the time I didn't want other stations to determine what I was going to play. Because I figured I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but I'd like to have some input into what I'm going to be playing 5 years from now. So we had Future Gold, and that helped. Again, the format was 25-34. But we had Don K. Reed, who did the doo-wop show on Sunday night. So we covered all the bases, but it was primarily the late 50s, through the 60s was the core at that time.
Well, at CBS-FM in 72, you came back to Pam's to have them re-sing that same package that you had in Philadelphia for New York. And that is actually when I met you for the first time, because by 72, I was at Pam's, and you came down for that session. And a couple of things about that. First of all, I don't know if you remember this, at Pam's, there was what we used to call the signature wall. It was just a wall in a hallway that had, I guess, white vinyl covering on it or something. And the idea was that clients would come and autograph the wall, their name and their call letters. And of course, Rick Sklar, who had been there earlier in the year, I think, had very near the top of the wall written in rather big flourishy handwriting, Rick Sklar.
Yes.
And I remember you looking at that, getting a chair from someplace, standing on the chair so that you could sign John Gehron, WCBS FM, above Rick's name. Do you remember that?
I remember that very well, yes. And Rick still talked to me after that.
Well, it was so funny to me. I took a picture of it, and it's just great. Well, the other thing that you may not be aware of is the fact that Rick was not happy at Pam's for doing jingles for CBS FM, because for the longest time there had been an understanding that WABC was arguably Pam's biggest, most important client, and that Pam's wouldn't be doing stuff for other New York stations. I don't know whether that was actually a written down contractual thing or whether it was just, an understanding. But I know that Rick was not happy at all that Bill Meeks and Pam's had done stuff for CBS FM, which kind of started a whole rift between WABC and Pam's, which, just a few years later ended up in them coming to us at Jam, which we started in '74.
I didn't realize that because, I must say, in thinking back, I was surprised that they did it for me. But I think they figured it was FM and he was AM, but I didn't realize that had bothered him. He never mentioned that to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, he certainly didn't blame you for it, but he wasn't very happy with Bill for having done that. But the jingles turned out fine, and here are a few of those.
Solid Gold Radio, WCBS FM.
New York's golden music.
WCBS FM.
Oldies all the time. WCBS.
Golden 101 FM. New York's golden music. WCBS FM. Where all the good songs have gone. WCBS FM.
We are talking with John Gehron today on Rewound Radio. And we left the story with you being at WCBS FM in New York. And Rick Sklar, the program director of WABC, took notice of what the station was doing. And he wasn't too happy that you were competing with him so effectively.
Yeah.
So in order to get you on his side, and possibly also just to get you out of the market, which I would take as a compliment, he suggested you for the program director job at WLS, right?
Well, I was hired because CFL had beat them for the first time. And so, my job was to come in and figure out what we could do better.
Well, at this point in the story, I am reminded of the fact that we did an interview many years ago, which you may remember. We did it at Jam as we were getting ready to prepare for our 20th anniversary. And you came into our studio and we talked a lot about the WLS story. So I'm thinking that perhaps it might be fun to just insert a little bit of that at this point instead of making you tell those stories all over again, if that's okay.
I'd love to hear it again.
And this was actually recorded on 9/11, but it was in 1993 before that date meant anything to anybody. But from September 11th, 1993, here's me and John Gehron talking about cool stuff.
I started at WLS in January 1974 after coming from CBS FM in New York. So it was a big thrill for me because I had listened to WLS growing up in the Poconos of Pennsylvania with Dick Biondi and all the other jocks that were on the air, and Art Roberts, and I heard all the stories about Clark Webber. Even though I couldn't hear him, I heard all about him on the promos, and I got to know the city pretty well by listening to the station, the streets and the suburbs and the weather and everything else. But I got there in 1974 and stayed there till the summer of 1987, so 14 years.
So the legendary nature of the station was not wasted on you. You appreciated what a big deal WLS was when you got there.
I don't think I had as much appreciation for WLS when I got there that I developed later on after realizing what had been handed to me, this big 50,000 watt radio station, and it didn't take me long to realize the effect it had on Chicago and the Midwest, and realize that I had been handed essentially what WABC was to the East Coast. So I had some appreciation for it, but I don't think I had the maximum appreciation that somebody from Chicago would have had they been given that job.
Well, one of the things that was handed to you was a great jingle heritage. WLS had always had interesting jingles all the way back to the early 60s. What do you remember of that?
What was interesting is that one of the regimes before me, and I don't remember which one, had come in and thrown all the old jingles out. And because I had listened to WLS over the years, I had remembered all those jingles and all the phases, starting with the Rock of Chicago all the way back to the Anita Kerr jingles that they had. And so one day I was looking for these things out of curiosity, and they weren't there. And one of the engineers heard that I was looking for the stuff and realized that somebody was there finally who appreciated the past of WLS and wasn't only worried about the present and the future. Because my feeling has always been that the past is a part of what is today and what will be tomorrow, and to ignore the past is somewhat silly at times, especially with a station like WLS and the history that it had. And I felt that history would be an important part of what I had to do to rebuild the radio station to where we wanted it to be. And that engineer had taken all those jingles that had been thrown in the trash and saved them and taken them home. And when they found out I was interested in the past and wanted to preserve some of it, brought them all back into the radio station again. So they had been saved.
That's unusual on two counts. First, that somebody caring saved them, and second, that they actually brought them back is the most surprising part.
Yes. So we made dubs of them all and gave them their copies back, but then we finally had copies for the files. But also when I got there, the jingles hadn't been updated, and we were going through a transition period and of what the station should be, what should the on-air approach be. So when I got there, it was time to update the jingles and develop a new philosophy for the on-air sound, because the Rock of Chicago had worn out, and they really weren't using much on the air at that point in time.
Well, the WLS logo, the melody to which WLS is sung, is one of the classics because of the fact that it has been constantly in use from the 60s. It still is in use as we speak, even though the station is a news talk format now. So certainly you must have realized that was a heritage that shouldn't be fiddled around with.
It was a great melody. It was a melody. It was a strength and a tool that not everybody had. Certainly anybody new coming into the market trying to go against us would have to start from zero. That was something that was very memorable, that was recorded in people's minds. And when they heard it, whether it be on your car radio or in an office or in the background, that logo was a constant reminder that the radio was tuned to WLS. And so when I did my first package, we put jingles on the air probably heavier than they had ever been used. We jingled between every song. We jingled between commercials because we felt that we had been in a tight battle with CFL and we were at parity, and we had to make sure that the people knew that they were listening to us, because we weren't sure that they knew it at some points in time, because the stations had begun to sound very similar in the on-air approach and so on. And so there were a number of things we did to try and differentiate ourselves from them, and one was using that very powerful logo and developing a new jingle package around them, modernizing it, so that we could, and with a lot of jingles, because we used them very heavily on the air, and we used them to develop our new slogans, which was, the music sounds best, the best music, and the most music. And we used a lot of short jingles since we were using them between the commercials. We also did a lot of new jock jingles, again trying to establish the names of our air talent. The air talent had gone through a number of changes right before I got there, and these people I don't think they had developed the on-air personality and recognition yet, and so we used those jingles to try and drive that name recognition home.
Jam did our first package with you and for you in 1978. What led you to entrust us with this assignment?
Well, it was a number of things that added up. And it started when I saw you working for Pam's. I was a very loyal Pam's user. I liked the sound, and that's a key point. I liked the sound that they had developed for the station, the sound of the vocal mix, and the sound of the studios, and everything else that went into what creates a sound. But there was a sound that I liked that I thought represented WLS. And you were there, starting, I think, in the dubbing room, and then I came down, and you were running the board, and you became an integral part of that sound. And when Pam started to have troubles and I felt I had to go elsewhere to get jingles, I went to some of the people who were in the market at the time, and I wasn't able to recapture that sound that I was looking for, nor the creative spark that I felt that had been there before. And so when you went into business for yourself, I felt that you probably better than anybody could recreate that sound I was looking for, because you understood it. You had been a part of it. You were the only other people who had written bits and pieces, but you had been involved in the whole process of putting our jingle package together, including even writing some of them. And I felt that you better than anybody could recapture that feel and that sound and that creative spark and energy that I was looking for WLS. And it worked.
We had also, by that time, started doing stuff for WABC, and I was always curious, were they run very autonomously, or was there a lot of communication back and forth?
It was a very autonomous situation. Geographically, we were far apart, and our approaches on the air were different. We had respect for what each was doing, and when Rick Sklar was still program director, we would talk, but he was busy running his radio station, and frankly, I was busy running mine, and the corporate philosophy at ABC encouraged autonomy and do it your way. I owe a lot to Rick. As I developed my philosophy of how a radio station should sound, that was definitely influenced by what he was doing on WABC, especially the basics. And I don't think there was anybody in the business better at understanding and developing and ensuring that the basics of a radio station got on the air the right way. And Rick and I were very good friends. In fact, he started running because of my running, and developed into a terrific marathon runner, far better than me. But he was always a delight to work with. He had wonderful stories that fortunately he captured in his book, and he developed some terrific jingle packages at that radio station, and the songs, the disc jockeys, and the sound of that radio station influenced a whole generation of people.
Well, back to that first package. Do you have any recollections of that experience as far as the sessions or coming down to our old studio there for the first time? Or what do you remember about that?
It was very small. It was very small, and I thought, okay, this is where we're going to do these jingles. But once I started working with everybody, I developed a comfort zone very quickly, and I found that everybody in the building had a special feeling for what we were trying to do with the WLS jingles. Not that you didn't care for all your clients, but I always felt that when I came down there, especially that first time, that this was something really important. And I felt that everybody was, from the receptionist all the way down the line, everybody wanted to do everything possible to make this a success. And I felt that when I was there, and that meant a lot to me.
For the benefit of those who think that doing a custom package is just a joyride and you come down to Dallas and work for 5 or 10 minutes and then go out and have a good time, perhaps you'd like to recall what the hours are like, especially in the mixing phase of some of those early packages.
The flight down is the most exciting part of the experience, and I hate to fly. It's a very laborious process. that couch in front of the control board becomes very useful as the days roll on and you want to stretch out. And I am constantly amazed and have a lot of respect for the singers who can sing these things over and over and over and do them one more time